has held a number of positions in South African Department of Foreign Affairs, and since 2002, he has been with the Department of Science and Technology. He has been responsible for managing the South African European Science, Technology and Advancement Program. He is also involved in Science and Technology Cooperation with the OECD Global Science Forum, the Group on Earth Observations, and he has been representing South Africa in negotiations with the EU in Brussels and elsewhere. And more recently, he has also served on activities to do with the successful bid, South Africa's successful bid, to participate in the Global Square Array, Kilometer Array Project, SKA. So, Daan, over to you.
Thank you very much. Are the slides there? Thank you very much for this opportunity, Professor Marcelle. Greatly indeed appreciated by the Department of Science and Technology, because certainly STISA-2024 is, although a document adopted by our heads of state of government, is a document for all Africans. And therefore it means that all Africans must engage in a vibrant and a dynamic and a critical discourse about it. The three points I would like to leave with you, and I listened very carefully and would like to thank the two earlier speakers for their perspective, much of which I can agree with, certainly. From a government's perspective, what is our perspective on STISA? First of all, we should celebrate it. And to quote an often cliche, STISA is worth celebrating just because it's there. Forget what's in it. We acknowledge it's not perfect, that's certainly, and it's very easy to be critical and to analyze STISA. I can also write a very critical article which could almost destroy the strategy. But the challenge is rather to see where can we improve and where can we enhance it. And then the point to conclude is we should take pride in it, but most importantly, we should take responsibility for it. Because what will happen with STISA, what its impact, what its effect will be, that will depend on us. No one else. We have to take responsibility for it. So I said we should celebrate it. First of all, because this is again a reaffirmation of support at the highest political level for science, technology and innovation in Africa and its role in promoting the continent's growth and development. And of course this has happened before, and of course we can go into a critical debate, what do these statements mean? But I do think it is significant, and I do think it's worth celebrating that in July 2014, with an agenda with many critical issues related to conflict, related to pandemic disease, etc., that when our heads of state and government met, they decided to devote quality time to the role of science, technology and innovation. That means it's on the political agenda, and I think that is important, irrespective of what happens after. Secondly, and I think, as you had mentioned, normally when our colleagues from the African Union Commission present, STISA is not the first. It builds on a whole series of engagements over many documents, and I do think it's the next logical step in the evolution beyond the consolidated plan of action. It's 10 years ago. In 2003 was the first time we started looking at the first drafts of the consolidated plan of action. Of course, it was adopted in 2005. But 10 years, I think, in any policy environment represents an appropriate time span to reflect and to move on to the next level. And today we're not talking about the CPA, but I would be, and I know there are many people who are very critical on the CPA, but that's perhaps a debate for another occasion, but the CPA did achieve a lot. We, for example, do today have functioning and funded networks of excellence in a number of scientific disciplines, which is a direct outcome of the CPA. So STISA is an opportunity for us to build upon on what is there. And then the third point why I think we should celebrate it, it just encourages debate. The very proof we are here. We are here with esteemed colleagues from based in the US, United Kingdom and elsewhere. And if we did not have STISA, we would not have been having this series of ongoing discussions which is so critically needed. But of course I am not here, even though as a government official, my head of state, my president, was part of the leadership of African leaders who adopted STISA, so we are fully committed to it. Fully committed to it doesn't, however, mean we are not allowed to be critical. because it's by being critical that we will be able to make of STISA what it was always intended to be, and that is a living document, a living instrument which guide us on the way forward to allow science and innovation to play its rightful role in Africa's growth and development. So some reflections were specifically from, and this is not a formal South African government position, this is my own reflection. I do think the document can be improved in clarifying roles and responsibility. For example, between what's happening at a continental level, the regional level, and the national level. This is not an easy issue to grapple with, the principle of subsidiarity. What are those things we should be doing together because we're better at doing together? What are those things the individual member states should be taking care of? And of course, you have, and others have rightfully pointed out, the roles of the private sector and others are not sufficiently articulated. And indeed, this is not a strategy for scientists, researchers, it is a strategy for all Africans concerned with the continent's growth and development. So those roles could be clarified. I do think the strategy could have been more specific on also the implementation plans. This is the next step. We know that's going to be elaborated, but perhaps the strategy could have been more specific. What I personally found lacking was, we talk about, the strategy is one about cooperation, but the African Union is not only about cooperation, it's also about integration. It's about building the Pan-African identity, where national identities do not matter so much anymore. This is also true for science and technology. That we do want, I do not want to, because we should not always be inspired what happens elsewhere, but of course in Europe, you may be aware of the policy concept of creating a European research area. I do very much believe we need an African research area, Pan-African funding instruments, etc. And I think that the strategy could have addressed that more. But also could have been more explicit, even though the strategy is contextualized very firmly in the 2063 agenda. There are a number of other strategies and policies related to Africa's growth and development which STISA should directly reference and should directly address. I can certainly agree with much about what is being said about how the focus on innovation could have been smarter. But for example, what I find lacking in the strategy is also articulation of how the strategy links with higher education and training strategies. Because after all, we used to have a Director General in the Department of Science and Technology. We used to say science walks on two legs. It's all about people. And if we do not produce the human capital, the strategy will be very difficult to achieve its ambition. But I said we should take pride in it and responsibility for it. We should take pride in it because this is all about African ownership. This is an African strategy. It was developed by African experts and it was adopted by African leaders. And it does assist to provide direction and purpose for our efforts. I also think I think the first speaker referred to the words enabling environment, and that's really what STISA should and does help to do, is to create that enabling environment. I think very importantly, it also helps us to set the agenda for Africa's international scientific and technological cooperation. There's any number of initiatives, the China-Africa Science Partnership, the India-Africa, the European Union, Africa, etc. And if we are going to derive optimal benefit from, and this interest in African science from the international community, it's very important that we set the agenda in Africa. International cooperation should never be an objective in its own right. Our Minister Naledi Pandor, is very explicit. We're not running after international funds for the sake of it, because that distorts our own agenda. It moves us away of what should be our national priorities. We see how do these international partnerships and international funding help us to complement what we are doing ourselves. And I think STISA will help us on the continent to very firmly set that robust continental agenda. And then the concluding point, and perhaps the most important point, is yes, STISA is there, it's been adopted, but what happens now depends on all of us. Those of us in government, those of us in academia, those of us in industry, those of us in the broader civil society. Because if we, and I take all the points about defining innovation, not confusing innovation with invention, but if we are going to harness this broad concept which we refer to of science, technology and innovation to make Africa a better continent for its citizens, that responsibility starts and stops with us. And that is very much the Department of Science and Technology. If you ask me for the South African government's formal position, we are fully committed to work with our partners, other national governments across the continent, with the African Union Commission, which after all, they are us, the African Union is us, to make sure that we implement STISA in an optimal manner. So those are my perspectives.
Thank you very much. What I want to do now is, because I know that because of some of the technical problems, we're running a little bit behind time, is to move immediately to the discussions. And so, Trix, you have an opportunity to come in, perhaps before we conclude, with some overview comments and points that emerge from both the panel and from the attendees.